Do you believe being a writer is in our DNA?
I personally do, for two reasons. One, there's emerging science that says we pass down a lot more traits in our DNA than previously believed. I also just know it for myself because for many years, of course I went by the last name of my dad, but as I developed my interest and really found out who I was, I realized I was much more aligned with my mom's side of the family that were dancers, musicians, directors, writers. That's really who I am inside. It just took me a long time. When I was in school, I always did really well in English. Always did well, but I was extremely curious and nosy, sometimes to my own detriment. And thought journalism was the end-all be-all, perfect for my DNA. But I was off a few chromosomes because fiction, nonfiction, being more expansive was really just part of the story of my family. That's what people did, told stories. I had an uncle who was murdered, unfortunately, great uncle, brilliant guy, 16 years old, was there at the beginning of Universal Pictures. And he couldn't help himself telling stories, being interested, and neither can I. And, it was really a searing moment when I realized that's who I am, because my mom, who always wanted me to be a writer, had gone on back to her next life. And so, I'm doing it for her. And, and when I say my prayers, I thank her every day for, seeing the person I was meant to be.
You were the kid that always asked why?
I was the kid that asked a lot of whys, probably to the point my parents and I said in an essay were reaching for earplugs. And I also got bored at school. I was the kid that would look out the window. I mean, I was a good student and attentive, but I did lose attention. I didn't need to do advanced geometry to get a taste of what that would be like. I wanted to more transport myself into history, or to see how Fitzgerald did it in The Great Gatsby. But it took me a long time to figure it out.
How did you realize you were a writer? You were curious, but how did you realize that writing was for you?
I think I got a really good grade on like an English exam, like in fourth grade, where other people weren't doing so well. And it just kind of worked in my mind. And I always liked books. I loved like Three Musketeers, Robinson Crusoe. So I read a lot. I was the youngest child in a very lonely, fractured house. I had two older brothers that were gone. And so often it would just be me, myself, my books, and my dog. And I would just read or, come up with ideas. So it was kind of, not forced on me, but it was a natural evolution. And I think it was then, very early, I just liked writing. The pen just moved across the page. It was not the way it always was in mathematics. That's actually a big part of my next book, my next novel, the follow-up to Arroyo, because and it is based on a true story. My dad was a mathematical genius. It would be so ridiculous that he, when I was struggling through pre-calculus and other mathematics that just, that just weren't in my DNA, he could beat my Texas Instrument calculator with his slide rule. That's how smart my dad was. Empathy, I don't think they make a slide rule for empathy, but in terms of advanced mathematics, man, he had it. And so that was, it's interesting when you're a kid, because that's, you start really realizing who you are in opposition to your parents. So those two things came, and my dad I don't think my dad read a novel after Caltech made him read 3 or something, going through civil engineering, they had to take some English class. And yet I never read one of his, advanced, astrophysics books. So, it was those two things, I was just being myself, but early on, it just came natural. Like some people can just draw. They just have that it quality. They have never taken a class in their stinking life. And these people get perspective and dimension and shading, which I never could do. But, I do think God touches in all of us some talent. And some people are more privileged than others to be able to develop it.
That reminds me of the thing when, if you can draw this, like send it in. Remember those in the back of comic books or whatever? And
Yeah, I had a friend in our little childhood gang of hooligans, and he just was a natural artist. And this is like in the early 70s, and he created a whole magazine based on cats as hockey players. Okay, get that around. Cats as hockey players, okay, you wouldn't imagine. And of course, he got to be the Kings because he was the biggest old guy. But I was always so jealous of Gerald. But then, I did my own thing.
And it was at USC that you realized that being a business major, correct me if I'm wrong, please, that was not for you?
You did your homework. Absolutely. I'm impressed. Yeah, I got accepted as a business major, which because I didn't really have the spine yet to send to my dad to say I'm not going to be doing that. And when I did, it was at a fraternity event. And there was like 150 people in this room. And he and I, what started out as me informing him on changing my major to journalism, became a massive John Hughes movie quality blow up where we were yelling at each other. My mom, the social butterfly, is mortified that we're having a public dispute, but it was just two rams going at each other on the mountaintop, and I think that was like my Declaration of Independence. And I did many other things as well, but I always hoped my dad would think, you know what, that kid stuck up for himself, or that kid's got stones. I never got there. Maybe he thought that, but that is really where I realized, no, I have to be my own person. And I had this amazing journalism class taught by Professor Fox, who was an AP reporter, just the best. Was not a touchy-feely guy. And this was like in the years after All the President's Men, Woodward and Bernstein. I mean, Bob Woodward was my hero. Upton Sinclair was my hero. I just love that romanticism of bringing down wrongdoing. So Professor Fox goes, okay, enough of the textbooks and assignments. I'm going to be a fictional mayor of a town resigning today on some corruption charges, and you each have one question to ask me. And at that moment, I fell in love. I just fell in love, and that's it. I knew what I was going to do. Even if my dad didn't want to speak to me, threatened to, have a hitman take me out, that is what I wanted to do. And it took me some years to get back to that. But, when you fall in love with a person or an idea. And that, for me, I was swooning when Professor Fox did that. And I had many other wonderful teachers that believed in me, and, I'm so grateful USC, was there. I am sincere about it. That is, when journalism is in my blood. And I was always so proud to tell people, what do you do for a living? Oh, I work for IBM, or nothing wrong with that. Or, I'm a patent lawyer. It's like, what do you do? I'm a journalist. And then, you'd also hate yourself for saying that, because the first thing out of their mind is, the story you should do is. It's like, oh, Jesus, I should have just told them I'm a patent attorney, because nobody has ideas for a patent attorney. Anyway.
Chip, you've said previously that you're a type A personality.
Yes.
How does that help in being a writer, and how does it a hindrance?
I think it helps because that's a very good question. It helps because you learn not to rely on anybody else. You learn, for me, fire in the belly is not, a mood of the day. That is a natural state of being. And so I do have a fire in the belly. And oftentimes I've directed that fire in the wrong place. I think it's fire in the belly. I also think the downside of being a type A is you're very self-critical. I've crucified myself more times than, there seems to be nails available in the world. And it isn't always the best for your sleep. I've always struggled with my sleep. I have had insomnia before the biggest moments of my life, and including taking my grad school test, where I swear I was so prepared and I slept like 1 hour. And I was back in grad school in DC. This is actually a pretty funny story, I think. I was going to McDonald's, of course, for the Breakfast of Champions before my big test, right? It's like a 7-hour test. And I'm so friggin' tired. And I didn't see a crosswalk, people coming, and I skid. I almost hit Patrick Ewing, who was an extremely famous basketball player who was attending Georgetown back then. And so I almost killed like $100 million of basketball contracts because I was so sleepy before my test. But you know, it is amazing what you can do with caffeine and adrenaline. But being type A, you know, I'm very laid back, and some people would say too nice about many things in my life, but I think when it really matters, the type A comes out, and it's, you know, you're living with a fire-breathing dragon because you're just so motivated. Two type A's together can be a very dangerous piece of alchemy, and you have to be very careful. And you know, sometimes you just need to have a type A, and you need to have an alpha and a beta. But two type A's can produce a lot of good, and they can also, you know, immolate.
What makes you proud to be a writer?
As opposed to a reporter or book writer?
Well, it could be all in one. Maybe there's parts of being a writer that you feel more proud of.
For me, when I was a reporter, when I wrote a story that I never set out to write, because I was practicing observation and tricks of the trade and just trying to keep my ear open for somebody to tell me something that they want to tell me indirectly, and then I get a big story out of it. That's what I felt good about. I was never a crime writer, even though I wrote a true crime book I'm very proud of, The Darkest Glare. But I was doing a story about political incestuousness of a local city. And this woman, while I'm working on books, because I freelanced even after I left daily journalism because I just love journalism. You know, I believe in it. And this one woman goes, "Oh yeah, if you could only figure out who killed this guy." It's like, what? And then, you know, I took that and I said, well, give me every phone number of anybody you think knows about this. And I went around and around and around, and just you know what I mean? And from a 5-second comment became a story, you know, that got the police off their lazy asses and reopened a murder investigation, you know, that this little city didn't even want reopened. So, you know, also I was lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. In terms of novels, I will say, you know, I don't believe in death. I do believe that this is just the thinnest of eyelashes of existence. But in this life, when I read my book, Arroyo, my first, you know, it was the first words of fiction I've ever written in my life. I've never written a novel. I've read a gazillion novels. But, you know, this is historical fiction, tongue-in-cheek, little splashes of magical realism. But when I would go back and, you know, there's many famous writers in the world, I'm still learning. You know, I came into fiction late, but I read a sentence, I think only this moron could have written this, you know, and that will last. Even if the world blows up somehow or another, I created something, you know, only I could do through, you know, the big man upstairs. I think that's kind of cool. You know, nobody will ever put together this permutation of words or thoughts, you know, and it's like, you know what, I think my mom is happy with me. That's what makes me feel good. Not seeing it on a bestseller list or some producer calling up or whatever, you know what I mean? Just kind of knowing, you know, I've created a little rivulet in a bigger stream.
What makes you believe as a reporter that you can get to the bottom of any story?
I don't believe that. I don't think I can get to the bottom of any story. But I think if you listen well and you show empathy and you're not just out for the most, you know, sensationalized side of the story, you can get closer to the bottom. Yeah. But what is the truth? You know, I mean, it's, there's three sides to it. Your side, the other guy's side, and then the truth. But the truth is, it can be hard to know what the truth of something that happens is, unless you really just are, I don't know, omniscient. None of us are. So I don't think you can get to the bottom of a story. You can sure dig out a lot.
Can you explain further? So how do you know you have a story? And how do you know that that's the final story?
I think you have a story after a while just by instinct, and there's something here. I'll try to give you an example. And when I was at the LA Daily News, we came across something that became much more common later, which would there be an environmental problem. The lawyers came in, tried to cut a secret deal with people that got sick. When I would go around and try to dig deeper into it and talk to people like a relative of somebody who signed a deal, they got money because they have cancer, but they can literally not tell their sister. And just as a human being, that is so outrageous. And you don't have to be a Boy Scout to know that's just wrong. That's what tells you a story, just your instinct, I think, for humanity. And, when oftentimes somebody cries, there's something really going on. And I saw that. And, it was just like peeling back a horror story. And it still has gone on. It's still gone on. And I'll refrain from saying who else I think is guilty in this. But, when I got up in the morning, I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it when I was driving home. I just knew that there was some stuff being covered up people needed to know about. And I was really, that type A in me had to, bring out more. My big regret is I left the paper probably prematurely to go start writing my books, including about my family. And I know there was much more that never was exposed. Even though that was partly the one that got away, I knew in my blood, this is really an important story, much more important story than about some corruption or somebody getting $50,000. It's people's lives on the lines. Can you imagine you get sick and your best friend lives next door to you and you cannot say anything about it, or you're going to lose $100,000 you need for an operation? That's what they do in America. I'll say though, I grew up in 1970s Pasadena in the tail end of the worst part of the smog era. And it was so bad. I mean, people that had perfectly normal lungs, were doubling over like they had asthma. And, I asked my mom a lot of questions about smog. She used to, her big response would be, it's getting better. Here's a damp washcloth and a bare aspirin, go lie down. And it must have seeped into my subconscious, because when I became a reporter and the environmental beat was up for grabs, I wanted it. I didn't even know why, but I think those memories and that curiosity, even though I didn't want to solve the chemistry of it, I wanted to solve the why. And we live very close to Mount Wilson, and you would not be able to see Mount Wilson. I mean, it was just this thick chemical fog that was brown and gray. And I remember, I always felt like it smelled like chlorine. I don't really know why. That would just come down and the outdoors would be canceled for the day.
How does being skeptical pay off?
There's a bumper sticker, which aren't very popular anymore, that says, if you're not cynical, you're not paying attention. I think that is true. And being cynical of everybody. It's good to have a healthy skepticism. During the pandemic, one of the interesting things the food makers did is family size food. Gosh, it doesn't feel family size. It's got the same height of family size, but that width is not family size. Somebody got suspicious and made a story about that. I don't think there's that much difference between being observant and skepticism. Or cynicism is a little darker, but people should be have more healthy skepticism about everything. You know, whether it's something a politician says, whether it's a statistic you read in some scientific journal, unsubstantiated anecdote your friend tells you. But to me, just I wish there was more curiosity in the world. Not apropos of that, but I remember I was driving on the Foothill Freeway and I saw a woman in an ambulance, and I could see it, this older African-American woman is in an ambulance, and I could see her face through the window. And I thought, what's her story? Is she going to be okay? Where's her family? You know, is this the end of her, or is she going to find a better chance? I almost wanted to, I just started getting really interested, and it probably had been a little stalkerish, but I wanted to follow and see if she's going to be okay and what the rest of her story is. So that's not skepticism, but I sure wish folks were more curious, and when they saw something on the internet, they got skeptical if that was true or not, and actually looked for verification of that. I mean, if your whole life is just going to one little website and seeing the world through that, that's going to be a periscope, you know. So I think, in a way, being skeptical or curious keeps you honest.
Do you put a time limit on the research that you do?
I'm a classic over-researcher because I'm so curious, and I will, for every 10 pages, let's say I print out, I'll use one. You know, that's the problem with rabbit holes, is that you don't know how deep they are. I don't put a limit on it. I try to put more a limit on my writing, you know, where I'm going to say I'm going to be done with this draft by this date, and I'm always, you know, as a journalist, I always met my deadlines. As an author, it's hard, especially if you're trying to keep a lot of irons in the fire. And I've tried to do that this last year. One thing I've noticed when I've gone back to my novel after I've tried to work on turning some of previous things I've done into trying to do a screenplay or a pilot, something like that. It's not that you're not just jumping back into fiction perfectly. And I can see when I try to BS my way back into being in a groove. You know, I wasn't really, you know, I wasn't focused enough. My mind was still half on something else. So, you know, the big problem for me is just keep focus from one genre to the next. Get back into that right genre, that right mode of writing, into your characters' heads, you know. And so, if you know, I'm working on nonfiction book pitch right now, and doing that and then writing dialogue for a character and a story you invented are night and day. So that is my challenge, is being focused, not being distracted by the other things you're trying to propel.
Well, that was my next question, is how do you balance having so many interests? Because it seems like there's so many things interest you.
I don't balance it very well many times, to be honest with you. You know, because I'm a perfectionist, I'm a worrier, I want to know how this is going. I don't want anything to get orphaned, but I just realized actually I've just put off everything else I'm doing to finish my novel, because I owe it to that story, and I can't be distracted. I'm actually writing it. Part of it is an honor. This is a true story of a dying friend who wanted me to help him write an apology letter, and I'm not going to let him down. You know, that's one thing I feel like when I'm writing something, I always have to be pissed off about something or doing it in somebody's honor. It's kind of that martyr syndrome. You know, it goes back to the belief of yourself as a hero. But I do have, you know, if you're so spread out, you're not being loyal to an individual idea. And so I have said I'm not doing anything until I'm done with this, you know, book called Later Days, and then I will go back to my other children. Yeah.
Well, maybe that is another part of why being type A is helpful, because you honor that and you want to finish it. You know, so many people start things in the film industry and they don't finish them.
Absolutely. When you're younger, you can, as a reporter, you have to be a good reporter. You have to be a good multitasker. Boom, boom, boom. You're working on 3 different stories at the same time, you know, and you just, when somebody calls you on one line, it's on something different. You just have to, you know, firewall and go to the next thing and be able to, your mind is more supple when you're younger. Now it takes me an extra cup of coffee or, walk outside or whatever. So, yeah.
Which is your favorite part of the writing process?
I think when you get an idea that you know is going to do something, is going to be your life for the next 2 years, I think that's pretty great. I also love the last sentence in my book. There's never been one where I'm not absolutely verklempt, weeping, feeling spiritual, thankful to my mom, for her belief in my writing. That is like, it's not like giving birth, because what does a man know about that? But it's something, it's almost like holy, that last line, and I don't know, it's like, that's my purpose on this world. The first sentence of the book is pretty amazing too. And you have to really think about that. For my small town book, it probably took me 2 hours. How do I find that first line? Is that crazy? Because I have the word beast in my first line of my small town book. The beast you couldn't stab, fanned across the waking city. And I thought, God, does that sound corny? Would Raymond Chandler ever say that? You know what I mean? But I just had to get it right. That first line. Sometimes I think you could tell. You asked, how do you know somebody has that it quality? Sometimes I think you could know it from the first line of a book. Sometimes not, because people start off slowly or they have their own ways. So, that first line, that last line, and then the conception of the book. I actually think writing a book is a little bit like being in a couple and you get pregnant, because that first night, is joyous and there's intimacy and there might have been some minor amount of alcohol consumed. And then, once you really commit to it, there's morning sickness and, morning sickness and back pain and, going out and getting, pistachio ice cream at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's rough, and you have to be really committed, and you have to make preparations for it. And then, this glorious, jubilant moment of giving birth, right? And then what happens? Somebody takes your baby away, and they judge that baby. Because that's what happens when you write a story, or a book. What came only from you, now other people are going to take it and condemn it and judge it. Maybe they'll say something nice, maybe they'll give you a starred review, but a lot of people will be looking for something to get pissed off about at you. You know what I mean? And sometimes it's like, you never argue with your critics. But man, especially in today's internet-driven book review world, and there's some things that aren't right. It's a little, it definitely some whiplash goes on. When you release your book to the world, I would not have it any other way. If I could do it again, I would have started writing novels when I was 25 years old, and they'd probably be horrific. But by the time I was 35, maybe I know what I was doing. So yeah, that's my only regret. My next life, I'm coming back. I'm getting into it right away.
Well, I get the sense that you can take the punches, at least externally, that you're not gonna go in the fetal position and for at least maybe not outwardly.
Yeah.
But I've heard of also authors having to reinvent themselves with an entirely different name because of critics. And just being tired of having to deal with it.
There's I think, you have to live, and it's the internet. I do think the internet and social media especially, social media lives on conflict. It also lives on creating false equivalencies and comparisons. And somebody said, comparison is the death of joy. And it is true. So, some of the people reviewing this book were so, because there's different companies that will review your book. They get a galley of a book and they review it. Some of these people had read 5 pages and said it's boring, or I did not finish after 5 pages, or they get such basic things wrong. You do wonder, who is this person? Have they taken an English class? So I can't get upset. I've had people give me great compliments, and I've been knocked before. I don't let it really bug me too much, to be honest with you. Yeah. Sometimes I will get a little bit defensive, and then I'll go back and think, you know what? I probably could have done that better. I was probably too glib there. I will tend to overwrite if I feel rushed or forced or trying to prove I can compete with that person, But when I relax and just let it naturally flow, that's when you get really good sentences. But I do try not to get too worked up about it because you know what, in the end, I think I've had a pretty magical career. As a journalist, things came so easily for me. But my life's arc was not supposed to always be easy. I did come from a family with resources, but I was supposed to struggle. I was supposed to fail and faceplant, you know what I mean? That's part of, what fun would it be if I just, you know what I mean? If I hit a home run or whatever and I came around, my jersey is clean, immaculate. I needed to get roughed up, and I have been roughed up. I have run into, I used to think writing was this virtuous, snow white profession in some ways, and then I found out, nope, there's just as many good and bad people proportionally in that industry as in politics. I've been screwed by agents. I've been defrauded by publishers. I've also been greatly benefited by amazing agents like the one I have now, or like the publisher I'm with. But you know what? I in a way, being a writer, we're all failing writers. We're all, in a way, because nobody's writing the perfect book. It is supposed to be almost more about you than it is for your audience. You're supposed to get roughed up and humbled because that's how you learn. Does anybody really want to read somebody who's 20 years old or 25 years old if they're writing a certain type of story, presenting themselves as 80? No, because life has not shaped them yet. So I think that's part of the reason, I'm doing this now. When I was 35 years old, 40, I wanted to find that corrupt politician and, you know what I mean, and get the New York Times interested in me. But things changed, and so, this story especially, I found out there are bad people in the world. The publisher, I can say now, the publisher I was with, who was based in New Jersey, this woman started negotiating the film rights behind my back. And when I caught wind of it, the journalist in me was irate. And then she realized she did not want to be working with somebody asking more questions than she could answer. So the whole thing blew up. It caused, damage to my career, caused questioning of my own self-confidence. But eventually I came out of it. I had people that believed in me and said, no, this is just part of we all have stories like that. That actually helped a lot. There's a lot of author, agent horror stories in this town.
What happens on a day that you cannot write? Whether it's no ideas are coming, you're busy.
I never have those days. No. My problem is I get so focused, I will work myself into exhaustion. True story, when I finished one book, this is like maybe 10 years ago, my brain cache was at so low that we had like a celebratory dinner, and my wife and kids were like in the ice cream shop, and they go, "Where's Dad?" And I was like wandering around the parking lot, just perfectly happy with my ice cream cone. I didn't even know where I was. My brain, I don't think, could even, realize you should be staying with them. I was so wiped out and exhausted. It's a very draining thing to write a book. I'll say the more depressing the book, the more I need to go to my guitar. As soon as that book is done, I've submitted to my publisher and make a song up. I wrote the best song of my life after I wrote the most depressing book of my life about China's environmental catastrophe. So it's a weird thing when you finish a book because you still have leftover creative energy. For me, I do. So actually what I'm doing with my next novel, there's an imaginary band in the book. It's called Radius Thaddeus. And we're going to record songs, and release them on YouTube. Like you're seeing the 18-year-olds, in a band playing the typical kind of, late 70s rock, And so I want to try to I always want to do things differently in the next book. In Arroyo, I made up a New York Times story. I made up a letter. In current book, I have an essay about Frank Flint, the founder of Flint Ridge. I have emails. I was thinking of a screenplay passage. That's one of the fun things is to try to always be creative. Where can it go? Maybe more people will watch that video of me playing guitar than will read my book. But, that's what I like is, and especially if you have a cool publisher for stuff like this, and I do, Rare Bird Books, They're a very musically oriented place. And so they don't say no. They say, well, how can we make it work in support of each other? So yeah, that's one of the things I'm giving myself as a treat. Once you're done with that book, you get to go write your song.
Well, they have vinyl as well
Absolutely.
in their library. Okay.
Oh yeah, they do great vinyl work. Yeah. So I don't have a day when I can't write. I don't have a day. Sometimes I'm thinking, when you write your book, it's like you write some. I don't want to give it away, but a man goes insane in my book, and I'm thinking, is anybody going to buy this? It's so crazy, and will they lean into it? But they will. If you're convincing and it makes sense. I just did an event at the Linda Vista Library. I'm coming from the world of journalism, nonfiction. Fiction is so competitive. There's people that have been doing this since they were 10 years old. Brilliant, brilliant people. And sometimes you just think, we think a lot of us. I have the imposter syndrome. I just fooled them once, but when I had this book event, there was a room full of people that wanted to, were interested. So that kind of like is a little bit of affirmation, to keep going. But I never have a day when I can't write. There are days when I can't write well, but I don't have a day where I'm going, I can't do it. I'm going to go to Magic Mountain or something like that. That never happens. Part of it was I was a journalist. If you told your editor, I don't feel like writing today, they were going to be, oh, well, then I need your parking pass, and bye.
What did your career as a journalist teach you about the opening of a story? Like the first sentence or two?
That there has to be a human being that readers are going to care about and relate to. So, stories that start off with a long-winded description of place may be beautiful writing, but they don't connect to people immediately. So, you have to actually think almost like a newspaper story. If it's a feature, almost like, beginning, middle, and an end. What's the arc of this person? But you always have to figure out where is the place to jump in. Where, I like to go in action. I always like to, something happening, not somebody reflecting or somebody, telling a story from a long time ago. But yeah, you have to, what's the essence of the story? That is one of the challenges of being a reporter is, making your mind work, saying what is happening here? Because there's a million things happening in the world. You could go to some Chamber of Commerce speech and just report, be a stenographer, basically an artful stenographer, or you could go, what's really, why do they bring us here? What's behind the press release, right? And so that's the mystery of it. Believe me, I spent a lot of time running around, pulling into 7-Eleven for a super healthy hot dog and Diet Coke and Fritos, trying to figure out what is my story here, and I didn't master it by any means. But, that's, you have to ask yourself, what's the human thing happening? It might seem very distant from some council committee reporting on, I don't know, affordable housing requirements for a developer. Well, they cut back a development from 7 to 6. Who's that family that gets the shaft, right? Stuff like that.
How much do the lessons of how to hook the audience apply to your writing as a novelist?
Very much so. Very much so. You have to be watching a lot of your children in a novel, that you've created. But you can never lose, my editors taught me this, you can't lose the thrust of the main character or characters. You have to really you have to write a drama, with words that people, are going to want to see, who is this character? How are they going to turn out? They don't know themselves what they're doing. Remember that, a lot of, some people will write, where the character will have perfect understanding of the situation. That's never the case. You have a perfect understanding. So, you have to make them sympathetic. You have to make them flawed as hell, and, people, sometimes it's easy to give a character, make them, they don't make a mistake or they don't misjudge a situation. And you can't do that because somebody's reading is going to go, I've never been like that. Cliffhangers are so important. Suspense is important. I also think really important is having a twist at the end. And were there people really paying attention? I had a twist at the end of my book about my family. And there's twists in every single one of them, but you have to plant them artfully. I've learned. And characters, characters must always be in conflict. Sometimes with themselves, other times with other people or a place. The stakes have to be clear. I mean, you're not saying, gosh, if he doesn't date this girl, he's going to, his life is just going to be a train wreck. But you have to make it very, you have to let people know this is why you're reading this section. It's not just, staging people around with pretty words and some good atmosphere. It has to have a point. Always has to have a point. And build, and explode. The slow burn, I'm learning, is a key. But then when that flash happens, it has to be worth the payoff. And so there's just a lot to keep track of. And that's one of the great things about doing fiction. When you write nonfiction, the universe is defined. Yes, you can write it artfully, you can create suspense, you can leave things for people to discover later. But with a novel, it is more like being a diver, going from 20 feet out into a 100-foot drop. That's a darn big ocean, and it'd be overwhelming. And the trick is just creating a manageable ocean of animals of your own creation, and you know what they're doing, and you always make it interesting and have surprises. You have to kill off characters. You have to, you think they're so noble. Well, actually, that was a very douchebag thing you did there, But then it's still a humanity people want to pull for.
What are the worst ways you can start a story?
By taking something terrible or unsettling that happened to you in your personal life and making it a false narrative. The worst way, that would be a pretty crummy way to do it. Or being so digressive because you're interested in that subject and you're going to force a reader to be interested in that you move away from, the locomotion of where your story is getting. So I would say that, there was a reason, J.R.R. Tolkien and Dickens and the others, they wrote books that were that thick because there was nothing else to do. People can't handle that. People want shorter and shorter books, which I think is a bit of a shame. But, a terrible beginning to a story or terrible passage is one that betrays your narrative, your plot, all that. You're just getting, maybe you're trying to show off or too cute for yourself. Yeah. And I'll tell you, I learned a lot. I made a lot of mistakes in this book. I had so much energy. I had so many ideas that I was trying to pack too much into the molecule. And some people noticed that. And if I did it again, it would probably be 20, 25 pages shorter. But I would not take it any weirdness. I would not take it out any imagination. But it is important you learn. And I would like every book of mine to be progressively shorter.
Was that because you felt so close to the story in the sense that you grew up seeing this bridge for most of your life?
I don't think so. I just had I have two lives. I'm trying to paint the story of a city, passing era, characters, a bridge that is a metaphor for a way of life. So transitions between people's lives and relationships, I probably dragged them out a little bit too much, but other people say, I've had conversations, people go, absolutely, I'm glad you didn't change it. That would have ruined it. So almost the worst thing you can do is, the best thing you can do is learn. The worst thing is go second guess and berate yourself. Why did I need that extra chapter? Whatever, because I could go back to the very beginning of the first stories I ever wrote, and going back to college and go, oh, how could I have done that? Every writer has that moment. Actually, it'd be pretty funny to take a Pulitzer winner and make them read the first story they ever wrote because they would be under the table embarrassed. But how do you get good unless you practice and get edited and get roughed up by life? So, that I'm kind of learning that. But it's you can't overcomplicate the story, and you also can't short arm it. So it's a balance.
You've written 7 books, correct?
Yes, but some of them have been updates of previous books. Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
How many have had a traditional publisher and how many have been self-published?
0 self-published.
Why is that?
Because I don't know. I want professionals, and self-publishing is a much bigger option. And publishers aren't perfect, but when you self-publish, that is a load. That is hard. You're competing against companies with endless resources many times. It's hard to get shelf space, promotion, all that, editing. In a way, it's very wonderful. It's democratizing. People can get their story out. On the other hand, it's contributed to the decline of bookstores. It's diluted the field because, can you imagine if, there's already too many lawyers, but now you can get your law degree after 1 year? What's that going to look like for people getting representation? So yeah, I mean, nothing against them. And I know people that have been with big publishers, that have been award-winning New York Times bestsellers, that said, they're getting older, they don't want to go through a publisher because it takes 2 years in the editing. I know enough good people, I'll just do it myself. I just don't want to do that. Yeah. So when I was a journalist, I would be so lucky. I must have the face that people want to tell their secrets to. Maybe they feel sorry for me, but people would tell me secrets, send me documents, whisper things in my ear. Sometimes I just got, it was unbelievable, and I did work hard, but a lot of that luck stopped when I transitioned to being an author. Maybe I didn't do all my homework. I thought I had a deal for the book about my uncle with a big time New York publisher. She got fired, and there went interest in the types of subjects in my book. That's happened repeatedly to me. I sometimes say, if you see me in your profession, you better look for a new job. My smog book came out during the middle of the Great Recession. And though the book got really good reviews, nobody cared. And I don't blame them. They cared about if their 401 is going to exist. Are they going to be broke? Are we going into the next? Remember, people thought we'd go into a depression. It does create a little narrative in your head. It's thinking, oh my God, my next book comes out. Are missiles going to be flying? Is it going to be bird flu this time? What's the world got in store for me? So it's always, I must say, it create a bit of a little syndrome in your head. But, I love writing and I will never stop.
How realistic is it for most writers to land a traditional publishing deal?
I don't know. It is hard to write, to get published, traditionally the way it used to be. The book industry, Smogtown, my first real book, came out in 2008. It's really changed a lot, the industry. There's been consolidation among the big publishing houses. A whole generation of older, really talented editors that had really developed some of the best writers in the world. They're gone. They're replaced by younger people. Social media has had a giant influence on publishers, I believe, where, it's not enough to have a story. You have to have a big built-in audience. In some ways, if you look at it from an economic point of view, they're trying to have more assurance about return on investment. But, we're pitching a book now that we think would have been a natural sale immediately, 10 years ago. It's not as simple anymore. Identity matters a lot. It just does. There's been a lot of marginalized people that never got publishing deals when I was getting a publishing deal, So it's their time now, but we're still in an adjustment period. So I don't know. You just have to really be more battle hardened. And fortunately, the last years I've published with a great publisher that's grown and grown and grown, gotten bigger rare bird books. Had really good experience with them. They publish some big time people. One thing I don't like about big publishers, and not their fault, but it can take a long time to get a book out, and the world can change in that interval. So, that's what, people that self-publish can get something in the marketplace very quickly. How many people are going to find it is the question. You've heard the old theory of if a tree falls in the wood, does it make a sound? Of course it makes a sound. A sound is not contingent upon human sensory experience to know it's create a physical effect in the material world. But man, it is a lot more exciting if that tree falls when there's people looking at it than if just a squirrel's looking at it. And so it's, there's so many writers, there's so much competition. It's just the very full sea. So it's not that easy. And how do you get your book to rise above it? People will go on TikTok or whatever. I did think about renting an ostrich in a cage for this book. I don't know if you guys have read my Arroyo yet, but ostriches figure quite prominently, and people really like ostriches. Like cowbell, there needs to be more ostriches. That's what people have told me. And so that, you have to find your way of standing out. A lot of authors have very developed audiences. So almost anything they write, people are going to read. Even if their quality of their fiction or writing is going down, sometimes it's going up. But it's just more, the commerce is trickier these days. That's what I'm saying, And writers are not always great at business or marketing. Some people are more natural than others. You really, that's why, if you self-publish, you're not doing it with an agent. I have a great agent, and, he's my friend and mentor. So that's very helpful, because I'm the person I want to learn, and I want wisdom. I sure don't have much of it, but I want it.
Would you say your audience changes for each book that you put out?
As I was saying earlier, I have genre skipped so much. I had a PR person say, you're schizophrenic. Stay in one thing. Stay in one area. Schizophrenic, metaphorically, obviously not mental illness. And, I'm trying to heed that advice. But you can't build an audience if you're writing true crime or environmental or biography. You just hope an audience is going to form around it, but that's really delusional. So, I'm still struggling with that, to be honest with you. And so that's why I'm sticking with fiction mainly. And I have the next book, my brain is really annoying. It's already working on that premise of the third book and what will be a loosely affiliated trilogy. So, it's if I did it over again, I would not be skipping genres. I might be staying in one genre and then doing journalism for other interests, But some people make their their whole life is writing true crime. I could not do that, just because it's, I don't know, among other reasons. Your glorious book is built on some family's darkest, more horrific pain. And I learned that with The Darkest Glare when I was going around interviewing people that I had to bring out of hiding or were crying or needed an antidepressant, and that was my book I was chasing, and so I will never write another true crime book. It's just, I'm just too much of a wuss. Or too empathetic, in that way. So it's, that's why it's nice to jump around. But I'm staying in fiction in the end because I can, dictate my own terms. So hopefully there'll be an audience that wants to hear what I'm saying.
What should an author look for in a prospective publisher?
Are you a good fit? Are you a good fit? Are they going to treat your baby well? Are you going to be their type of author? Can you live with their editing and their vision and their artwork? Have you asked the right question? It is really an arranged marriage. Are you a good fit? I think that's the number one thing. I've learned that trying to develop things for Hollywood. My grandfather, who was a prolific Hollywood musician, made both my mom and her brother, the uncle I wrote about in my book, promised they would never go into Hollywood because he knew what the sharks were like there. And yet they went into Hollywood. And guess who's making that same mistake too? It's a whole nother world, and I find it just fascinating and bewildering and very frustrating. But I'm still I still, want to make still want to do something there. I've been optioned, but you don't know the people you're going to be working with, especially if you never meet them. It's all a Zoom relationship. You have no idea how they operate or how they treat their staff or whatever. And no wonder, no wonder things break up so much, because it's just a bad fit to begin with. But somebody has an idea and there's some money at hand and some executive, wants that type of show. But you don't really know until you're working with people, is this right for me? I would rather not have something of mine made if I feel like they're going to do it harm. They're going to need to make up and twist people's background. They're going to miss the theme of it, to sell, create some false ending, where there's, they think is satisfying, but is really a betrayal. I would never do that, And there is a lot of that. I don't agree with shows where they change people's backgrounds of real people. Just make up people, base it on the real people. So, you have to really think about that. Would you rather die in obscurity with your integrity or die wealthy with, a guilty conscience? I would rather do the former.
How often does a professional writer write?
Probably not that much. For me, my best, it's, somebody used to be a reporter. It is hard to, it's hard to become if you weren't a reporter, you're a recovering reporter. And I have 4 digital subscriptions to newspapers, so I can't get it out of my blood. But you have to really focus and not be distracted. And I'm trying to work on that, like only giving yourself 5-minute break at 10:30 and then walk your dog at noon. But the internet makes it so much harder to focus. And I'm kind of learning of myself, like by 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my attention span is just like, popcorn. It's just popping and going every place, and it's not focused at all. And I use that time to go back and copy edit or try not to do, write fresh material, because I'm just not as sharp, So it is partly knowing your own routine, and being okay with yourself, not bashing yourself. Oh, I didn't write 3,000 words a day. I kind of don't believe in that. But, I think it's making peace with who you are and what's realistic. But just remember, all professional writers are masters of procrastination. And part of it's fear, maybe even part of it is the creative process. I find for myself, I get my best ideas when I let the front part, when I stop letting my neocortex be so busy and I let the back wheels of my brain work. I've gotten such good ideas just walking my dog and not thinking about it. And it's like some part of me I don't even know is working on the problem of a plot issue or what would a character do. So, I think that's kind of like the magic of writing. When I was working on the last version of the book about my family, I knew them so well after writing previous versions that I could actually see them walking in front of me. I knew what my grandfather would say. I could see him holding a stogie, and so it is kind of just like a very magical experience, but also you have to be hard-headed and know, you're not going to be writing great material at 7 o'clock at night after your 3rd Diet Coke. You have to just go rest and settle into a ritual that's you.
If you have an idea for a story, where's your beginning?
That's a brilliant question. I like being organized. When you go into a lot of newsrooms, they're pigsties. You can't see people's desks because there's so much crap, Post-its, old stories, notes, and all that. My desk would get like that every day. That's just occupational hazard. But I had to have it neat and organized when I left for the day, and I would take a lot of crap about it. But that's just the way I am. I'm the type of person my bed has to be perfectly made. The bathroom could be a pigsty, and my wife will be on me about toothpaste in the sink and all that. But it's creating a sense of order where there is none. But it's just a deception of oneself. I still like, going back to my college days, having a 3-ring binder and using separation tabs And like for this book, you know, for the book I'm currently doing, Later Days, I have my outline, right? I have my character interviews. I have my sketches. I have, every time I write a book, I try to make myself read 10. You know, just to learn, grow. You never know what you could do. I take notes on every book because what's the point of reading a book for, to help you if you don't take notes and can't remember. You know, so I just do like one page. Even though I barely refer to this during the writing process, it's my security blanket. I know it's here. It's the foundation, you know. And the thing I look at most is probably character sketches. But for my first novel, Arroyo, I was so insecure about it. My dad was dying, other things going on in my personal life. I wrote a 30,000 word treatment. 30, that's almost like that's a novella. But I needed to do it for myself. And it was amazing comparing that treatment with this actual book, because the treatment probably had 5% of what I had in there. It doesn't matter. It still was getting me in the place where I felt I had the confidence to write. You know, one thing people have said about being a novelist, I get it, is that if you really have a going, your characters will tell you what to do. They'll tell you how to end the book. So I feel like that's going on now as I'm rewriting and tightening my last draft. My characters are saying, no, he wouldn't say that now. He might have said that in draft number 2. Now you know him better. But having this, a binder, it's for me, it's wonderful, you know. And, I have articles about Flint Ridge, locking out of Flint Ridge. I have articles about Caltech. I have articles about somebody who makes cameos, Richard Feynman and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I got to know their stories. But having this is it's almost not Cliff Notes, but it's my, handy wallet-sized, documents that remind me, who the identity of the story is.
What advice do you have for authors who want to strike out on their own, possibly leaving a good-paying job and making writing fiction or nonfiction books their full-time endeavor?
I would really spend a weekend investigating a career in IT. You asked, what advice do you have for somebody that wants to get into it?
Yeah, in terms of, let's say, like time management, just knowing who you are as a person. Are you going to be able to fulfill obligations to yourself? Because
you mean to write a book, like write a book while they have a full-time job type of a thing?
And decide to leave that job and say, well, I'm going to become an author.
It's almost, that is a very rarefied breed that people can make a living as a full-time author. Some do, and they've paid their dues. I know one very, very good author. He had 7 unpublished novels before he first got his break. You have to make a living, pay for your family, have some self-worth, have something, I think you should just go in assuming you're not going to be able to make a living out of it. And you're doing it for the fun, for the challenge, for the passion of it. And there's famous writers that work in LA, where they had a teaching job or a newspaper job, they're working on a book, they're getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So they're putting in 3 hours a day before they start their job. Now, picture them 12 hours later, right? They are dog tired, they're coming back from their job, their wife has got a baby with colic, and they're going to bed at 8 o'clock at night because they're a human being. So it is tough. But I really respect those people that do that. But you can, it's brutal to go in. I think you're fooling yourself, unless you're in some exceptional situation, to think you're going to make a living as a book writer, because it is hard. There's just a million ideas being pitched. I think I've read that over 90% of people seeking representation from agents are rejected. And something like over 95% of agents submitting books by their clients to publishers are rejected. So think about that. There is this line going around, that is sort of the thing that says they're always looking for a reason to say no. I think there is a lot of fear. Hollywood is this. I'm just so curious about it. If Hollywood was a person, what would that person look like and be like? Because they would be, to me, creative ambitious, and maybe a little afraid. I think fear runs a lot of it. They don't want to be the person that turned down the next Harry Potter, right? But they also don't want to be the person that, just, has a 3-book deal for a dog that sells. Most books sell under 500 copies. Think about that. All the work, care, sweat, struggle, under 500 copies. So it just tells you, you can have a wide distribution of stories, but very few, are going to make you a full-time job, make you famous, get you to go into your boss and say, F you, I don't think I'm coming in again tomorrow, right? That's just not the way it is.
Do you think it's less so now? There's this rumor that we're reading less. I'm not sure if that's correct or not.
We are reading less.
We are, okay.
Yeah. People, there's books out there now I don't want to read about. The human brains are changing. This, unfortunately, is changing the brain. People are getting, people's attention, we are like goldfish, this, that, or, my daughter is a dog. It's got the world's shortest attention span. That's the way people are with TikTok and YouTube and all that. They're so connected to nothing. They forget about stories and we have more ways for people to read stories and absorb and enjoy stories than ever before. Think about it. Audiobooks, ebooks, what's going to be next. But I'm very concerned that the written word is under assault. And if we didn't have such a needlessly divided country, we would be tackling this. We'd be tackling this because, there's been a lot of Hollywood blockbusters based on the premise the machines are going to take over. I would say the machines already are taking over and we're letting it happen. In fact, we're urging it to happen. The idea that we let ChatGPT help a kid write a college paper when those parents maybe couldn't go to college and they worked their asses off, and you're going to let a machine be your education, or the idea AI is going to write a script, and people are accepting it as a fait accompli. That is who was running who. Last time I looked, it wasn't the machines that created humanity. It's the opposite. So I am very worried about it. And this is the stuff people in Washington should be arguing over instead of a laptop, and our folly will eventually, do a terrible number on the human creative spirit. I don't want a machine making up a story. What, huh? Where did that machine struggle and sweat and learn? So I am deathly afraid that's going to happen. And I'm even more mortified. We're not doing enough about it. My wife teaches at USC. She sees the effects of technology. They all see the effects of technology, but we're not powerless, So that's the way we are right now. But will there be books in 200 years? I don't know. Probably. But I don't know if people are going to be reading them.
Well, there's an experience that you can't get from a screen that you can get from holding that book. It's a different experience.
Yes, but what happens if you're holding a book that's been written by a non-human?
Sure.
So, actually, when I see pictures of like the beautiful women that AI produced, they're not my vision of beautiful. They're too perfect. To me, I think, your imperfections are your perfections. It just crazy that we're letting it happen. We all saw the movie I Love 2001, HAL 2000, but we're just letting HAL 2000 now, run the world. So we better be careful. Because I don't know if they're going to get that genie back in the bottle.
You've said previously that survival is sometimes the biggest victory in and of itself. What does survival for an author look like?
These are good questions. What does survival look like? Well, hopefully, above survival, I think self-knowledge. It wasn't just all tail chasing. I would hope at the end of this life, before I go back home, people would go, you know what? That was a pretty darn good piece of writing, and he was a good person, and I wasn't just doing it out for myself, and so I do hope that. I do think the most important thing in life is being kind. It's not always the most accommodating with being a writer. But I do hope people will go, you know what, I like that, that was a beautiful sentence, and he wasn't a jerk. When somebody came to him for help, he was there. He didn't just big time them. So I do try to live that. I've been influenced by other people around me that I've seen go out of their way, to be, try to remember who they were even as they were achieving things professionally. So the biggest turnoff I could ever see is I've seen authors that that seem so cool and affable and man of the people, and then as soon as those cameras are off, they are an absolute animal. There's a great movie called Tin Cup with Kevin Costner, and Don Johnson plays one of these smiling athletes, but as soon as that camera's off, he will not sign a kid's autograph. He'd push them out of the way. I would never want to be that way, and I think you do know everything you need to know about people by the way they treat somebody they, quote, don't need. So I think those two things, I'm, when I'm someday not around, I hope my daughters will go, I miss Dad. They'll look on page 75, there is Dad. You know what I mean?